5,000 workers, the largest employer in the borough, a brand so dominant it entered the English language. Across Britain, people didn't vacuum, they hoovered. The Pentrebach factory built the washing machines and cleaners that earned that name, on ground in a Welsh valley where iron had been smelted a century before. Then 3 men made a decision. They offered 2 free transatlantic flights to anyone who spent £100. 300,000 people applied. The cost reached 50 million. The executives were fired. The company was sold to Italy. Production moved to Turkey. And the 5,000 workers who'd had nothing to do with the promotion, the families who'd built their lives around those gates for 61 years, watched it all disappear. The factory sits empty now. Demolition begins this year. This is the story of a janitor's cough in Ohio, a factory that transformed a Welsh town, and a single catastrophic promise that brought it all down. What's left is the word itself, said every day in every home by people who'll never know what it cost. Chapter 1. The Janitor's Cough. The story begins not in a Welsh valley, but in a department store in Canton, Ohio. And it begins with a man who couldn't stop coughing. James Murray Spangler was a janitor, 59 years old in 1908, asthmatic, and getting worse. Every evening he swept the floors of the Zollinger department store, and every evening the dust got into his chest. The broom was killing him. So Spangler, a tinkerer by instinct, a man who fixed things because he couldn't afford to replace them, decided to build something that would sweep without raising dust. He took a soapbox, fastened a ceiling fan motor inside it, attached a broom handle for reach and a sateen pillowcase to catch what the motor sucked up. It was crude, it looked ridiculous, and it worked. Spangler filed a patent for his electric suction sweeper and began showing it to anyone who would look. One of the first people he gave a machine to was his cousin, Susan Troxell Hoover, wife of a local leather goods manufacturer named William Henry Hoover. William Boss Hoover had built a respectable business. He and 2 brothers had founded a tannery on the family farm on East Maple Street in 1870, producing horse collars and leather goods. Good, solid, unremarkable work. Hoover had no connection to President Herbert Hoover or FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Just a common surname and an uncommon eye for opportunity. Susan liked the machine. She told her husband about it. Boss Hoover tried it himself. And in that moment, a leather manufacturer watching dust disappear into a pillowcase. The trajectory of an entire company shifted. Hoover bought Spangler's patent for $36,000. In today's money, roughly £1.25 million. He kept Spangler on as production supervisor, paying him on a royalty basis. It was a fair arrangement. It wouldn't last long. Spangler died in 1915, just 7 years later, never seeing what his coughing fit had started. The company was formally incorporated on the 6th of December, 1910, as the Hoover Suction Sweeper Company. Boss Hoover's son, Herbert W. Hoover Sr., took the helm in 1922 and renamed it simply the Hoover Company. But it was the marketing that mattered as much as the machine. Hoover placed an advertisement in the Saturday Evening Post offering 10 days free home trial. No obligation, no deposit. It was audacious. It was also brilliant. Within a few years, 5,000 dealers across the United States were selling Hoovers. In 1919, Gerald Page Wood, an advertising art director at Irwin Wasey and Company, created a slogan so perfect it would outlive the company itself. It beats, as it sweeps, as it cleans. By 1912, Hoover was selling to Norway, France, Russia, Belgium, Holland and Scotland. First sales reached England in 1919. The pillowcase prototype from a janitor's workbench in Ohio was becoming a household name across 2 continents. And then, in 1932, Hoover decided to build something in Britain that would match its ambitions. Chapter 2. The Palace on Western Avenue. The architect Thomas Wallace had a philosophy. "A little money spent in the incorporation of some form of decoration, especially colour," he said, "is not money wasted. It has a psychological effect on the worker." Wallace, of the firm Wallace, Gilbert and Partners, the same practice that designed the Firestone Tyre Factory and Victoria Coach Station, believed factories didn't need to look like factories. They could look like something worth being proud of. The building he designed for Hoover at Perivale, West London, opened on the 2nd of May, 1933. Lord Rochdale cut the ribbon. The press called it a modern palace of industry. They weren't exaggerating. Egyptian, Aztec and Mayan-inspired elements ran across the facade. Grand columns flanked recessed glass bay windows. Above the central entrance, beneath huge Hoover Limited lettering, a geometric sunburst pattern announced itself to every car passing along Western Avenue. John Betjeman described it as a sort of Art Deco Wentworth Woodhouse, with whizzing window curves derived from Erich Mendelssohn's work in Germany, and splashes of primary colour from the Aztec and Mayan fashions at the 1925 Paris exhibition. Not everyone loved it. Nicholas Pevsner, the architectural critic, initially called it perhaps the most offensive of the modernistic atrocities along this road. Opinion shifted. It always does with buildings that dare to be something. By the mid-1930s, the Perivale factory extended to 254,000 square feet. 1,600 people worked there. By 1951, that number had nearly doubled to 3,000. Hoover wasn't just selling vacuum cleaners in Britain, it was becoming Britain. Then the war came. The Perivale factory shifted production overnight, from vacuum cleaners to aircraft components and electrical equipment for planes and tanks. The building was camouflaged with netting and repainted to look like allotments from the air. A lookout post went up on the roof, manned by members of the sales force too old for active service. A Home Guard unit was formed in 1940, and in Ohio, Herbert W. Hoover Sr. did something remarkable. He personally organised the evacuation of 84 children, the sons and daughters of Perivale employees, across the Atlantic to North Canton for safety during the Blitz, a corporate chairman arranging the rescue of his workers' children. It wasn't a publicity exercise. It was a reflection of a company that still understood what it owed to the people who made it work. Back in North Canton, the American factory ceased all vacuum cleaner production from 1941 to 1945. The lines that had built Hoovers now turned out helmet liners, propeller motors, lifebelt inflators, bomb parachutes, gun turret motors, and, most significantly, variable time fuses, described as second in importance only to the Manhattan Project in the Allied war effort. When peace came, Hoover faced a new problem. A good problem. Demand for household appliances in post-war Britain was enormous. Every home wanted a vacuum cleaner. Increasingly, every home wanted a washing machine. And Hoover's existing British facilities, Perivale, Cambuslang in Scotland, High Wycombe, couldn't keep up. The man who solved it was Sir Charles Blampied Colston. C.B. Colston, chairman and managing director of Hoover Limited, had spotted the potential of marketing the Hoover electric washing machine at a low price to a war-weary nation desperate for domestic convenience. But he needed space, vast amounts of it. The answer came from government policy. The Distribution of Industry Act 1945, largely prepared by Hugh Dalton at the Board of Trade, was designed to steer new industry toward development areas. Regions dependent on heavy industries that had been devastated by structural decline and Depression-era unemployment. South Wales was at the top of the list. Between 1945 and 1947, development areas received over half of all new industrial building in Britain, despite having only a fifth of the population. In Wales alone, 264 installations had been built by May 1950, creating an estimated 200,000 jobs. The Board of Trade suggested the Merthyr Tydfil region. Colston accepted. It was on paper a marriage of convenience, government subsidy, meeting corporate need. In practice, it would transform a town that had been dying for decades. Chapter 3. Iron Ground. Merthyr Tydfil had been the iron capital of the world. 4 of the planet's greatest ironworks, Cyfarthfa, Dowlais, Penydarren, and Plymouth, had roared and hammered along this valley. In 1804, the world's first steam railway journey had taken place at Penydarren. Richard Trevithick's locomotive hauling 10 tons of iron and 70 passengers along a tram road. For a brief, extraordinary period, this small Welsh town was the engine room of the Industrial Revolution. Then the iron left. Plymouth Ironworks closed in 1882. Penydarren had gone silent in 1859. Cyfarthfa followed in 1919. Coal mining had supplanted iron, but coal was retreating too. By the interwar years, unemployment in Merthyr exceeded 25%. The town that had once fed the world's appetite for iron was a byword for poverty and deprivation in 1930s Britain. It was on the site of the former Plymouth Ironworks, the very ground where iron had been smelted and rail had been rolled, that C.B. Colston cut the first turf in June 1946. One devastated industry, literally replaced by another. The same earth. Different century. Different hope. Like Perivale, the new factory was designed by Wallace, Gilbert and partners. It carried the same Art Deco DNA. A handsome facade, built to declare that the people who worked here were making something that mattered. Construction took 2 years. On the 12th of October 1948, the doors opened. The guest of honour was the Right Honourable George Isaacs, MP, Minister of Labour and National Service. A special train was laid on from Paddington to Pentrebach station, which was decorated for the occasion. A mat 635 feet long, nearly a fifth of a mile, ran from the station to the factory entrance, much of it undercover. That evening, a cabaret for factory staff was broadcast on the BBC Light programme. The Science Museum still holds a wooden clock in the shape of a washing machine, inscribed, Hoover Electric Washing Machine, Merthyr Tydfil Factory. Opened October 1948. 350 workers walked through those gates on the first day. The site covered roughly 25 acres. Nobody laying that 600-foot carpet could have guessed that within 25 years, 5,000 people would work here. That the town would be renamed in the factory's honour. That a single reckless marketing promotion, dreamed up in a boardroom 4 decades later, would destroy everything that carpet had been rolled out to celebrate. But that was all to come. In October 1948, what mattered was that Merthyr Tydfil had work again. Chapter 4. Hooverville. The first machine off the Pentrebach line was the Hoover 0307 wringer washer. A single tub with a hand wringer, an aluminium wash tub holding 4 pounds of clothes, powered by Hoover's signature pulsator. An impeller mounted on the side of the tub, spinning in a constant direction to create fast-moving water currents that pushed the wash through the soap. It was basic. It was effective. And for post-war British households still boiling clothes in copper tubs, it was a revolution. What followed over the next 2 decades was a production history that tracked the domestic life of Britain itself. The Hoover Twosome and Spiner rinse arrived in 1957, a single tub paired with a spin dryer. The Hoovermatic twin tub, launched the same year, became so popular with British housewives that it made them the last in the industrialised world to move to fully automatic machines. It was produced at Pentrebach from 1948 all the way to 1993, sold globally under different names, including, wonderfully, the Washdog in North America. Then came the Keymatic in 1961, Hoover's first UK automatic washing machine. It featured a revolutionary key plate, a plastic cartridge with slots and ridges, like a key, that you inserted to select from 8 wash programs. Designed at Hoover's engineering laboratories in Perivale, built in Merthyr Tydfil. A machine conceived in West London and born in a Welsh valley. Every washing machine on the Pentrebach line underwent a running test before it left the building. Every single one. The testing line was the last stage, and workers could hear the machines humming through their cycles in rows, a wall of white steel and turning drums. Above them, cabinets moved along overhead tracks in and out of the enamelling plant. Motor winding machines whirred in the background. The air carried the particular warmth of enamel curing, of electrical insulation, of machine oil applied to moving parts that would soon be washing someone's shirts in Swansea or Sheffield. It was repetitive. It was noisy. And at lunchtime, you could watch the first Keymatic football team take on the second Hoovermatics. A man called Hugh, interviewed in 2008, put it simply. I worked at the Hoover plant for 18 years until 1980. It was good, solid work. My whole family worked there. My father, uncle, 2 brothers, and myself. There wasn't a family round here that wasn't connected to that place. Multi-generational employment was the defining feature. Not the exception. The norm. Idris Weber started as a toolmaker in the late 1950s and rose to become shop steward, serving as secretary of the Tree-Harris Amalgamated Engineering Union. Derek David spent 36 years as a machine tool fitter. Philip Little put in 35 years across several departments. Lees James worked as foreman in dispatch from the 1950s until his death in the early 1990s. Nearly 4 decades walking the same corridors, loading the same bays. Tony Williams and his father Fred Williams both worked there through the 1970s. Father and son, same gates, same shifts. The factory ran an apprenticeship program for 44 years, from 1948 to 1992. The entrance exam was described as really tough. Those who passed spent their first year at Perivale before returning to Merthyr. Training staff included Stan Fraser, Mr. Elliott, and Jack Prosser. Names still remembered decades later by the men they taught. But Hoover didn't just employ Merthyr Tydfil, it built the town around itself. The company purchased disused railway sidings alongside the factory, reclaimed the land, levelled it, and laid a cricket square. By 1953 the wicket was ready, and in June of that year Wilf Wooler led a Glamorgan club and ground 11 against a combined Hoover and Merthyr 11. By the 1980s, county cricket was being played there. Glamorgan versus Kent. In the 1988 Refuge Assurance League, Glamorgan versus Middlesex, the following year. A 1957 Pakistan Eaglets touring fixture was hosted on that same ground. Today's Merthyr Tydfil Cricket Club is an amalgamation of Hills Plymouth CC and Hoover's CC. The works built the pitch. The town still plays on it. There were bowling greens and a pavilion, tennis courts, a fire brigade, a library, a social club. Children's Christmas parties in the staff canteen. One former attendee remembered. I remember going to the children's Christmas parties in the canteen. Then after a certain age, we had to go to the castle cinema. Summer fetes with cricket and stalls. The council allocated 1 in 10 new council properties to Hoover key workers. On the Keir Hardy estate, 18 of 276 houses went to key workers, including Mr. E.F. Coombs of Hoover Limited, allocated number 27 Wheatley Place. The factory wasn't just an employer, it was an institution that fed, entertained, trained, housed, and defined an entire town. The Local History Project records it plainly. The new Hoover factory was at the centre of the increasing prosperity, and this was reflected in the increase in footfall in the high streets as a consumer society began to emerge. The town had a name for itself, and it wasn't Merthyr Tydfil, it was Hooverville. Chapter 5. The word itself. By 1973, on the factory's 25th anniversary, more than 5,000 people clocked in at Pentrebach each morning. 5,000. Hansard records confirm it. At that point, Hoover had 5,500 employees across the UK, and half of them, were in this one factory in this one Welsh valley town. Counting the Glasgow and Cambuslang works, Hoover's total British workforce peaked at 16,500. The Pentrebach factory was the largest employer in Merthyr Tydfil County Borough and one of the largest employers in Wales. The site had grown from 25 acres to around 40, supplemented since 1958 by satellite factories at Dowlais, Aberdare and Cyfarthfa. The main factory had been extended, and that extension was opened by Queen Elizabeth II, who was photographed alongside Felix Mansaga, chairman of Hoover Limited. Princess Margaret had visited in 1950. The Prince of Wales would come later. Royalty kept returning to Pentrebach because the factory kept mattering. And something else had happened. Something no marketing budget could have manufactured and no competitor could undo. The word Hoover had entered the English language. Not Hoover, capitalised as a brand name. Hoover, lowercase, as a fact of British life. A noun meaning any vacuum cleaner, regardless of who made it. A verb meaning to vacuum. Collins Dictionary recognised it. Cambridge Dictionary recognised it. It sat alongside Googling and jacuzzi as one of those rare moments when a brand dissolves so completely into a culture that it stops being a brand at all. The genericization happened through the 1950s and 1960s as Hoover vacuum sales exploded across Britain. By the peak years, Hoover held over 50% of the UK vacuum cleaner market. In the United States, market share reached above 40% in the late 1980s. The Hoover Junior, introduced in the 1930s, became the biggest selling vacuum in Britain. Hoover sold millions. Across the country, in living rooms and on landings, people talked about hoovering the carpet. They still do. Despite Dyson and Shark now being the biggest sellers, most Britons still say they're hoovering. The ghost of a brand outlived the body. From the BBC Wales documentary Welsh Towns, narrated by Eddie Butler. Workers at the factory described the atmosphere as pleasant, the people as family, the days as filled with laughter and singing. That was the summit. 5,000 workers, a word in the dictionary, a queen at the gates, laughter on the shop floor. They couldn't see what was coming. Nobody inside those walls could. The factory that had survived post-war austerity navigated the chaos of Sinclair's doomed C5 electric vehicle, 12,000 of which were assembled in building MP7, connected to the main works by a tunnel, before production collapsed in August 1985, leaving Hoover owed £1.5 million, had weathered every challenge thrown at it. The next one wouldn't come from a competitor. It wouldn't come from a recession or a trade war or a technological shift. It would come from inside the company itself, from a small travel agency, from 2 marketing executives, from an offer that sounded, to anyone paying attention, too good to be true. 2 free flights for a £100 purchase. The advertising slogan said it plainly, unbelievable. It was. Chapter 6. The Men with the Tickets. By 1992, the world that had built Hooverville was fraying at every seam. Profits at Maytag Corporation, Hoover's American parent company, headquartered in Newton, Iowa, had fallen from $147 million in 1987 to $74 million in 1992. A 50% decline in 5 years. In the UK, Hoover's share of the vacuum cleaner market, once above 50%, was dropping fast. James Dyson had arrived with his bagless cyclone technology, and the old guard, Hoover included, had no answer to it. A recession was biting. Consumer spending had tightened. And at Pentrebach, something more immediate was happening. Unsold stock was piling up in the warehouses. Into this desperation walked a small, now defunct travel agency called JSY Travel. They were struggling too. The recession had hollowed out the leisure sector. In early 1991, JSY approached Hoover's UK branch with an idea, a travel-based promotion to shift the excess inventory. Buy a Hoover product, get a free flight. Simple, compelling, dangerous. Maytag's American parent had already noted the success of Air Miles schemes in the US and instructed the UK team to explore travel-based campaigns. The instruction landed with 2 marketing executives based at Merthyr Tydfil, Michael Gilby, Director of Marketing Services, and Brian Webb, Vice President of UK Marketing. Above them sat William Faust, Managing Director of Hoover Limited and President of Hoover Europe. Gilby and Webb designed the promotion, Faust approved it. Phase 1 launched in August 1992. 2 free return flights to one of 6 European destinations, Paris, Amsterdam, and 4 others, for any purchase of Hoover products totaling at least £100. The cheapest qualifying product was the Hoover Turbo Power Total System Vacuum Cleaner, at £119.99. It was popular, it was manageable, and it encouraged the three men to do something catastrophically ambitious. On the 1st of November 1992, Phase 2 launched. 2 free return flights to New York or Orlando, Florida. Same qualifying spend, £100. The retail value of 2 transatlantic return flights was approximately £600, the equivalent of roughly $1,200 today, 6 times the cost of the product. The advertising slogan, 2 return seats, unbelievable. Before launching Phase 2, Hoover consulted Mark Kimber, Managing Director of PIMS SCA, a risk management and promotions consultant. Kimber looked at the numbers, he looked at the terms, and he told them not to do it. His assessment was unambiguous. I advised Hoover of the potential pitfalls of the promotion. Having looked at the details of the promotion along with attempting to calculate how it could actually work, I declined to even offer risk management coverage based upon the information presented. With such a high-value offer for only a relatively small cost to the consumer, to me, it made no logical sense. Hoover ignored him. The reasoning inside the company rested on 2 assumptions. First, that most customers would spend well over £100, improving margins on each sale. Second, that the deliberately arduous application process would deter the majority of people from ever actually claiming their flights. The redemption process was designed as an obstacle course. Customers had 14 days to mail their receipts, 14 days after that to return a registration form, 30 days to select 3 combinations of departure airport, date and destination. Hoover retained the right to reject all 3 choices and request alternatives, then reject those 2 and offer its own combination at times and from airports designed to be as inconvenient as possible. Customers also had to prove they'd booked accommodation and insurance before receiving tickets. Gilby, Webb and Faust expected approximately 50,000 applications. They anticipated a 5 to 10% redemption rate. The maths on those assumptions just about worked. The assumptions were wrong. Chapter 7. The Avalanche. 300,000 applications arrived. Not 50,000. 300,000. Representing over 600,000 potential flights. Over 200,000 people bought Hoover products specifically and solely for the flights, most spending the bare minimum. The per-unit economics were devastating. Roughly £30 profit margin on a £119 vacuum cleaner against £600 in flight costs for each redeeming customer. Every redemption was a £570 loss. The factories went on to 7-day shifts. 75 additional staff were hired just to process the flood of applications. In the December to January push alone, the period when the US flights were most heavily advertised, Hoover sold an estimated 80,000 extra appliances. Retailers reported customers walking into shops, buying the cheapest qualifying product, collecting the proof of purchase, and leaving the product on the counter. A flourishing second-hand market in unused Hoover vacuums developed overnight. One Scottish carpet store began giving away free Hoover vacuums and the accompanying flight coupons to any customer spending roughly £2,000 on carpet. The vacuum cleaner had become worthless packaging for a £600 flight ticket. The Observer captured the absurdity. It would have taken 500 jumbo jets to accommodate every customer who bought a Hoover for the flights. Then the suppression began. When it became clear that demand had shattered every projection, Hoover began systematically obstructing claims. JSY Travel, the agency that had originated the concept, folded under the pressure. Applications were redirected through 2 firms called Your Leisure and Free Flights Europe, and parliamentary early-day motions would later accuse these firms of placing unjustifiable obstacles in customers' paths. The tactics were brazen. Customers who submitted 3 departure dates and 3 airports were told none were available. They were asked to submit 3 more. Those were rejected too. Then Hoover would offer its own combination, typically from an inconvenient airport, on a midweek date in January, designed to be unusable. Meanwhile, an early day motion revealed that Hoover's travel firm, Your Leisure, was selling return UK to US flight tickets to bucket shops for as little as £139, while simultaneously denying customers their free flights. Flights existed. Hoover simply didn't want to give them away. BBC Watchdog ran a major investigation. Reporter Simon Walton and undercover researcher Hilary J. Bell documented the suppression tactics and broadcast them to the nation. The programme generated over 600 complaints and inquiries. The Daily Record contacted 300 complainants and found that only 7% had their complaints resolved by mid-March 1993. Into this chaos stepped Harry Sitchie. Sitchie was 39, from Hemel Hempstead, and he was furious. He'd bought a Hoover, he'd applied for his flights, he'd been given the runaround. So he founded the Hoover Holidays Pressure Group, alongside Sandy Jack, George Alexander Jack, a retired headmaster and former commando from Merthyr Tydfil. 71 years old, ex-military, and not remotely inclined to back down. The group swelled to more than 4,000 members. Sitchie described them as doctors, lawyers, pig farmers and electricians. His public declaration was concise. We don't want blood, we want tickets. Sitchie and Jack bought shares in Maytag, not because they wanted dividends, because they wanted access to the annual general meeting in Newton, Iowa. In April 1994, Sandy Jack, a 71-year-old retired Scottish headmaster, stood up in the Maytag AGM in the American Midwest and confronted CEO Leonard Hadley directly. The encounter made headline news on ABC television and the front page of the Des Moines Register. Ralph Nader's consumer organisation threw its weight behind the group, with staff member Marsha Carroll declaring, "We are 100% behind you." Others took a more direct approach. Dave Dixon, 42, from Workington, held a Hoover delivery van hostage in his driveway, barricading it with his horse truck for 13 days until a high court ordered its release. Dixon had been told by a Hoover technician, "If you think buying a washing machine's going to get you 2 tickets to America, you must be an idiot." Dixon hadn't bought a washing machine to be called an idiot. He'd bought it because a company had made a promise. Chapter 8. The Bill. On the 31st of March 1993, Maytag fired the 3 men who'd created the promotion. William Faust, Managing Director of Hoover Limited and President of Hoover Europe. Brian Webb, Vice President of UK Marketing. Michael Gilby, Director of Marketing Services. Gerald Cameron replaced Faust. The others were simply gone. Leonard Hadley, Chairman and CEO of Maytag Corporation, announced a $30 million charge against first quarter 1993 earnings. His statement was measured. These promotions were flawed, and we are taking strong steps to rectify the situation. The word flawed was doing an extraordinary amount of work in that sentence. The numbers told a story that no corporate statement could contain. Gross sales revenue from the promotion, approximately £30 million. Cost of fulfilling the flights, at minimum $50 million, with estimates ranging up to $100 million if every claim had been honoured. Maytag's total eventual outlay, the equivalent of approximately $72 million, covering flights for some 220,000 customers. In 1993 alone, Hoover posted £23.6 million in operating losses on $390 million in sales. A further $7 million was spent on an advertising campaign to restore the brand image. It didn't work. Then came the pension fund. Harry Sitchie's book alleges more than £30 million was paid out of the Hoover pension fund to cover the costs. What's documented in Hansard is this. Hoover's UK pension scheme had held a surplus of approximately £123 million. In 1993, the company moved $16.8 million from that surplus to its general fund. The money that workers had been promised for their retirement was used to pay for flights that marketing executives had promised to strangers. Market share collapsed. From over 50% to under 10% by the mid-1990s, it never recovered, not under Maytag, not under anyone. Sandy Jack became the first person to take Hoover to court, at the Sheriff Court in Kirkcaldy, Fife. In 1997, a test case at St Helens County Court before Judge Bennett ruled Hoover guilty of abusing the one application per household rule, awarding two complainants over £450 each. Solicitor Nick Davis at J. Keith Parks in Liverpool said he represented 120 people with similar claims. Lawsuits continued until 1998. At least 3 early-day motions were tabled in the House of Commons. One, with 89 signatories, congratulated the Daily Record and BBC Watchdog and called on the Department of Trade and Industry to conduct an inquiry. Another, signed by 39 MPS, called the promotion a wicked confidence trick perpetrated by an unscrupulous company. A third revealed the bucket shop scandal. Mid-Glamorgan County Trading Standards investigated but ruled out criminal prosecution. Officer Alan Miles offered a verdict that satisfied almost nobody. The company could be accused of extreme gullibility, but there was nothing to suggest it had set out to deceive or defraud customers. In 2004, the BBC broadcast a documentary on the scandal as part of its Trouble at the Top series. 1.7 million people watched. The broadcast led to the withdrawal of Hoover's royal warrant by the British royal family. The Queen, who had opened the factory extension in 1973, now wanted her name taken off the brand. Hoover's US President, Gerard Ammon, told shareholders the damage plainly. Our production losses forecast for the coming years run into millions of US dollars. 80% of the total is attributable to Hoover Europe. The Guardian later quoted a delegate at a marketing conference. Mentioning the name Hoover is rather like shouting Hindenburg at a 1938 convention of airship designers. 3 executives lost their jobs. They'd earned it. But the 5,000 workers at Pentrebach, the people who'd had nothing to do with the promotion and everything to do with the product, they were the ones who would pay the longer price. Because the free flights disaster didn't just cost £50 million, it made the sale of Hoover inevitable. And everything that followed, the foreign ownership, the slow disinvestment, the transfer of production overseas, the final closure, flowed from that decision, in that boardroom, by those 3 men in 1992. Chapter 9. Sold. In January 1995, Maytag sold its Hoover Australia unit for $84 million. The European operation was next. On the 30th of May, 1995, Maytag sold Hoover Europe to Candy S.p.A., a privately owned Italian appliance company based in Brugherio, near Milan, controlled by the Fumagalli family. The sale price was approximately $170 million, £106 million. Maytag recorded a loss of $130 million on the transaction. Analyst Nicholas Heyman at NatWest Securities offered a blunt assessment. Maytag just doesn't have the resources to compete in Europe. To play there, they'd stretch themselves too thin, so they're getting out, which is a good move. A good move for Maytag. For the 5,000 people whose livelihoods depended on what happened next at Pentrebach, the word good required a different definition. Candy acquired Hoover Europe's headquarters, 3 manufacturing works, Pentrebach, Cambuslang in Scotland, and a facility in Portugal, and the rights to the Hoover trademark across Europe, parts of the Middle East, and Northern Africa. Peppino Fumagalli, awarded a CBE in 1998, was the key figure. Colin Darwin, Candy's marketing director, said the 2 brands would run alongside each other. The acquisition made Candy the 4th largest producer of washing machines, refrigerators, and similar products in Europe. Initially, it looked like it might work. Candy invested more than £40 million in the Merthyr and Cambuslang works. New equipment, updated lines. For a brief window, the factory had a future again. Then the investment stopped. Gerald Jones, the MP for Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney, would later state in a Hansard debate that Candy subsequently declined to invest further in the company or its operations and refused to contribute to the company's pension scheme. The pattern was familiar to anyone who'd watched British manufacturing under foreign ownership. Acquire the brand, harvest the name, transfer the knowledge, move the production. Hoover washing machines increasingly became candy designs made from candy components, assembled at Pentrebach but conceived elsewhere. The brand name on the front still said Hoover. The engineering inside no longer did. The decline came in stages, each one cutting deeper than the last. November 2002. A fire tore through the factory. Extensive damage. Production disrupted for months. May 2004. A 24-hour strike over pay, with 350 workers on the picket line. 2 further strikes followed within 3 months. There was talk of 130 job losses. A union official told the press the disputes had seriously affected the factory's relationship with management. Late 2007. Candy announced redundancies among temporary staff. Up to 130 workers lost their jobs weeks before Christmas. The timing was noted. The timing was always noted. Then on the 18th of November 2008, the announcement came. Candy confirmed that production at Pentrebach would cease. Manufacturing would move to Turkey, the Czech Republic, and the Far East. 337 manufacturing jobs were at immediate risk. Staff numbers had been falling for years. The 5,000 of 1973 had become a few hundred. But 337 people still walked through those gates every morning. 337 people still made washing machines in Merthyr Tydfil, and now they were being told it was over. Chapter 10. The Last Shift. In January 2009, hundreds of Hoover workers marched through Merthyr Tydfil. It was a last attempt. Everyone knew it was a last attempt to force a reversal, to shame the company or the government into action. The Welsh Assembly government pledged support and deployed a team of specialists. Merthyr Tydfil County Borough Council joined the effort. But there was a pervasive sense in the town and in the factory that it was too late, that it had been too late for years. Di Havard, the Labour MP for Merthyr Tydfil and Rhymney, spoke in the workers' defence. Hugh Lewis, the local assembly member, did the same. Malcolm Brown, a Labour Party member and former Hoover worker, said what many were thinking. The Welsh Assembly should be forcing these firms to stay in the area and keep the jobs, but it's doing nothing. On the 6th of March 2009, workers were told. They would be out of work in 7 days, not 7 months. 7 days. And they were required to maintain full production until the last day, to keep making washing machines that would carry a brand name already being dismantled around them. On the 13th of March 2009, the workers came in for the final time. They ran the lines, they built the machines, they did what they'd always done, and then, 2 hours before the end of their final shift, they stopped. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the production lines at Pentrebach went dark. 337 workers received their P45s. Unite Union convener John Jones led a march the length of the factory floor. Someone carried a mock-up of the grave of Robert Crawshay, the 19th century ironmaster buried in Vayner churchyard, above Merthyr, under a headstone that reads simply, "God forgive me." The symbolism was deliberate. Another era of industry dying on the same ground. Another set of workers walking away from a place that had defined their lives. Another worker carried a box of T-shirts. The T-shirts read, "Make Candy and Hoover Human Resources Vice President David Lunt happy and take the shirts off our back." David Lunt was the management figure the workers dealt with during the closure. They felt he'd dismissed their concerns. They felt, in fact, that management had lied to them, that the closure had been planned long before it was announced, and that every reassurance had been a delay tactic. David Roberts, 60, from Gurnos, had worked at the factory for 39 years. He told the press, "The workers have bent over backwards for the firm over the years, and we are all absolutely disgusted by our treatment. We knew something was going on months ago, but every time we voiced our concerns to David Lunt, he palmed us off with nonsense. Some of us were even told the rumours were untrue by management on the morning of the day the announcement was made." 39 years. He'd walked through those gates since 1970. He'd been there for the peak, for the 5,000, for the Queen's visit. He'd been there for the free flight scandal, the sale, the slow contraction, the strikes, the fire. And now he was being palmed off with nonsense. Clark Pritchard, 51, from Pentrebach, was more measured. I would probably agree that manufacturing is cheaper abroad, but we really need jobs in this country, and this news has come at the worst possible time. It's a dig in the ribs that they have closed the factory during the 60th anniversary. I'm not bitter about it all, I'm just absolutely gutted. Ian Whitcomb was 21. He'd worked on the assembly line for 4 years, his entire adult working life. "I can't believe it is going," he said. "I'll grab what I can and see whatever is out there. I haven't got any qualifications. I came here straight after leaving school." A worker identified only as David had been there 7 years. "I've never seen the mood so low. We used to have a lot of laughs and jokes on the shop floor, but that's all gone now." And a woman called Carol, working a campaign stall outside the factory, said something that placed the closure in a longer history. Margaret Thatcher started all this. I did all this, leafleting and petitioning, for the miners. We've still got fight left in us, you know. The Wales Online headline read, "Day of Tears and Cheers 130309, the day that Hoover died." Approximately 113 workers were retained for headquarters functions, warehouse operations, and after-sales service. The skeleton of a workforce in the skeleton of a factory. Chapter 11. The Quiet Hulk. The site lingered on as a warehouse and distribution centre, first under Candy Hoover. Then in September 2018, Chinese multinational Qingdao Hire announced the acquisition of the whole of Candy SPA for €475 million. The Fumagalli family sold their 60% stake. The deal completed in January 2019. A Welsh factory that had been American, then Italian, was now Chinese. In 2019, Hoover opened a new head office in Warrington, Cheshire. Only distribution remained at Pentrebach. The factory that had employed 5,000 people was now a staging post for parcels. In May 2024, Hire announced complete withdrawal from Merthyr Tydfil. 45 remaining warehouse jobs lost. Distribution outsourced to GXO Logistics in Rugby, Warwickshire. HR Director Matthew. Given wrote the formal letter to Gerald Jones MP. Jones responded publicly. "This is the end of an era. Hoover's plan to leave Merthyr Tydfil. It's incredibly sad that the 45 remaining jobs will leave the town." On the 31st of December, 2025, the site closed completely. What the ruins look like now is what the ruins of British industry always look like. The massive red brick facade, the distinctive curve of the main entrance, still legible as something that once mattered. Inside, a forlorn shadow. The manufacturing works to the south, the assembly works to the north, the disused bowling green, the pavilion, the cricket pitch where Glamorgan once played county matches, the former tennis courts, the helipad, the car park, the old social club, the gatehouse. All of it still there. None of it used. The author Gareth E. Rees described it. The factory closed in 2009 and remains a quiet hulk by the Taff at the edge of the town. Across the road is a derelict car park, its tarmac crumbling, with moss and grass creeping across the last faded parking bay lines. 72% of Merthyr Tydfil's lower super output areas now fall in the most deprived half of Wales. It is joint third most deprived local authority in the country, behind Blaenau Gwent. Average weekly earnings were above the Welsh average in 2003. They fell below it in 2008, the year before Hoover closed, and the gap has widened every year since. The population is approximately 58,000. The South Wales valleys have lost cumulatively over 200,000 jobs. Professor Steve Fothergill at Sheffield Hallam University described the coalfield as having seen only half its lost coal jobs replaced by 2008, partly because it is Britain's only mountainous coalfield. The redevelopment plan is approved. Civil engineering firm Walters Group will buy the factory. Demolition begins in 2026. Up to 441 new homes will replace the works. A community hub, a metro station, open spaces. Councillor Andrew Barry called it a game changer and an opportunity to lift Merthyr out of the deprived state it has been in. Councillor Clive Jones said it was like a new village being built there. The Art Deco facade. Designed by Wallace, Gilbert and Partners, the same architects who created the Grade 2 star-listed Perivale masterpiece in West London, is locally listed but has no statutory protection. Whether it survives the demolition is not guaranteed. In Perivale, the facade was restored and turned into luxury apartments. In Merthyr Tydfil, no one has made that offer. Hoover itself issued a valedictory statement. Our Merthyr Tydfil washing machine factory was more than just a production site. It was a symbol of dedication, excellence and community, and we are grateful to everyone who was part of that achievement. Your legacy is woven into every step forward we take. The step forward, in this case, is a housing estate. Chapter 12. What remains? The Hoover brand still exists. It exists in two pieces, split across the Atlantic like a broken plate. In North America, it's owned by Tectronic Industries, a Hong Kong-based multinational that bought the Hoover business in 2007 for $107 million. Products: floor care only. Most manufacturing has moved to China. In Europe, it's owned by Haier via Candy. Hoover-branded washing machines are largely Candy designs made from Candy components. The name on the front is the only thing that connects them to Pentrebach. But the word endures. That's the strangest part of the story. And perhaps the saddest. Across Britain, in living rooms and on landings, people still say they're hoovering the carpet. They don't mean a Hoover product. Most of them don't know there was a Hoover factory. They don't know it was in Wales. They don't know that 5,000 people once made washing machines there, that a queen opened the extension, that children went to Christmas parties, in the staff canteen, that a cricket pitch was built on reclaimed railway sidings, that a man called Hugh worked there for 18 years alongside his father, his uncle and his two brothers. They don't know that a janitor's cough in Ohio led to a pillowcase on a broom handle, and that the broom handle led to a factory, and the factory led to a town, and the town led to a word that outlived everything that made it. The cricket pitch will become a housing estate. The Art Deco facade may or may not survive. The 635-foot carpet that once ran from the station to the factory gates is a memory held by no one still living. What remains is the word. Quiet. Ordinary. Domestic. Said without thought. Without history. Without grief. Hoovering the carpet. It's all that's left.